Hello, this is Myra Elaine from the Buying Space Channel. Today I continue my series on Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the four Gospels. And today we are in Luke chapter 14, and we are starting on verse 15, the parable of the great feast. Hearing this, a man sitting at the table with Jesus exclaimed, "What a blessing it will be to attend a banquet in the kingdom of heaven." Jesus replied with this story: A man prepared a great feast and sent out many invitations. When the banquet was ready, he sent out his servant to tell the guests, "Come to the banquet, it is ready." Back in these days, it was custom if you were going to invite people into your home, you would spread the word to start with. And people would RSVP the day of the banquet that they would come later. And then the person hosting the banquet would send out word again by their servant, excuse me, that the banquet was ready. Because it was, when you had a lot of stuff coming together, it was hard to know, give an exact time. And I don't even know people had watches back then. So they would just send out the servant or servants to let people know. So they'd already said yes. This servant was going to people that had already said, "Yeah, we'll be there." But they all began to make excuses. One said, "I have just bought a field and must inspect it. Please excuse me." Another said, "I have just bought 5 pairs of oxen and I want to try them out. Please excuse me." Another said, "I just got married, so I can't come." The servant returned and told his master what they'd said. His master was furious and said, "Go quickly into the streets and alleys of the town and invite the poor, the crippled, the blind, the lame." After the servant had done this, he reported, "There is still room for more." So his master said, "Go out to the country lanes and behind the hedges and urge anyone you find to come. So the house will be full. For none of those I first invited will even get the smallest taste of my banquet." So, why do you think Jesus is telling the story of the people that didn't show up to the banquet? What does that have to do with the kingdom of heaven? We have the Bible. We know that Jesus Christ died for our sins. God has sent us an invitation to the kingdom of heaven. And all of us that say we're believers have said, "Yes, Lord, I'll be at the banquet. I'll be at the kingdom of heaven." But then we don't do what we need to do. We don't show up. Now, the kingdom of heaven, I should make this very clear, is open to everyone. So this group of what in their society would have been second-class citizens, they were already invited to the kingdom of heaven. Jesus is telling the parable of this banquet or supper to show that if you are invited, you should come. And people make the lamest excuses for not doing what they should do or not doing what they said they would do. The gentleman that had land to inspect, it was still going to be there the next day. The team of oxen was going to be there the next day to test. It's not something that neither one of those are something that had to be done right now. Is this what they wanted to do? It was an excuse because maybe they didn't want to go to the banquet. Maybe they just wanted to do these other things that could have been done later. And the gentleman that just got married, what a perfect way to celebrate, to go to this banquet and have all this wonderful food and probably entertainment and drink to celebrate with your new bride. There would have been time after the banquet to do whatever newlyweds do. So there was no reason for him not to go and take his bride and have a wonderful, glorious time celebrating his new wife. But here he is making an excuse not to go to the banquet, which Jesus has made synonymous with going to the kingdom of heaven. What excuse will you use not to go to the kingdom of heaven? What excuse do you have for not accepting Jesus Christ in your heart? He died on the cross for our sins. He said, I go to prepare a place for you, meaning the kingdom of God for the afterlife. And are we going to find things that are more important to us than that? My father-in-law used to say when he was alive, Myra, will that matter in 100 years? Because it was about this little thing or that little thing. I mean, those little things weren't so little, some of them, and they did matter, but maybe not as much as what was going to be in place in 100 years. Sometimes when he'd ask me that question, I'd say, yes, that would matter in 100 years. But most of the time, it would not. So it was his way of telling me, let it go. Let it be. You're not going to change it. Think about how important this is on a scale of whether it's going to affect you or someone else in 100 years. Sometimes we don't know what our actions will do or inactions or when things are done or not done in 100 years. Native Americans, they ask themselves before the tribe makes a decision, how will this affect the next 7 generations? So Native Americans understand this concept of putting these trivial things in front of decisions that need to be made that really make a difference, like going to the kingdom of heaven, or people being able to eat in 100 years or in 7 generations. Actually, 7 generations would be approximately 140 years if your generations are 20 years. Generations can be shorter and they can be longer. So it's basically 140 years. But here Jesus is saying, be grateful for your invitation. That seat at the table could be taken by somebody else. Somebody that you might even think, or thinking this way is wrong, is that it's less than you. Lower status person. And actually, this host was doing exactly what Jesus had said in the prior passage, that when you have a luncheon or a banquet, don't invite friends, brothers, relatives, or rich neighbors, for they will invite you back. So he was now inviting people who could not pay him back. This was a true act of charity because the people coming now to the banquet would never be able to throw a banquet they could invite him to because they didn't have the means. So even though this was an insulting situation where these people were making lame excuses not to come to his banquet, he ended up doing something wonderful for his community. And good on him. But you all have a wonderful and blessed day. And the next time we'll talk about the cost of being a disciple.